Do men peak in their 30s? Here's what the Bible has to say about that. What's going on, you guys? My name's Ben, and today this is going to be the topic of our video. There's going to be a lot of different opinions on this. Some guys say, hey, men actually are strongest in their 20s. Some say, no, men don't actually peak until later in their 50s and 60s. What actually is the truth, and what does the Bible have to say when it comes to the topic of age and men? Let's go ahead and jump into this. So first and foremost, who am I? My name's Ben. I'm the founder of Faith and Fortune Academy. First and foremost, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. By the grace of God, I'm currently making over six figures. I got a 50% funded undergraduate degree and a fully funded graduate degree in engineering. I've secured full-time offers from over 3 different Fortune 500 companies, as well as several other places. And my goal is to help Christian men navigate corporate America without losing their souls. And the topic of today's video is actually a really big part of that. It's figuring out, okay, when does a man, according to scripture, according to the Bible, when does a man actually hit his prime? Because at the end of the day, that's what we want to do as men, is to really maximize what God has given to us. So let's jump into this topic. So yes, I'm not going to build it up any longer. The Bible does seem to confirm it, at least in the case with several stories and characters in the Bible. So running through this list, David, he was king over Judah at 30 and over all of Israel at 37. If you go through and you read his story in 1 Samuel, he spends a good chunk of time in the shepherd fields or on the run from King Saul, and he doesn't actually become king until the age of 30. So that is confirmed. The Bible explicitly says that and calls that out. So if you think about it, David basically spent his quote-unquote, if we're going by the theory of, oh, your best years are in your 20s, well, then David's kind of screwed because he spent all of that time on the run from Saul. But as seen in his story, he's able to become king at 30 over all of Israel at 37. Right, so that's a really interesting factor to see right there for David. Next thing is Joseph. Same deal, actually very similar to David. He became second in command over Egypt and actually got married right at the age of 30. And it's funny because if you track his life trajectory, again, gets sold to slavery at 17. He's kind of rising up that corporate ladder, so to speak, in Potiphar's house, right? And then what happened? A false accusation by Potiphar's wife, and boom, he gets thrown in the dungeon. If you were to look at Joseph's life, right, and you were tracking about 2029, you'd say, man, he's not doing too well. But of course, we know how that story pans out. It becomes literally a year later, God promotes him from dungeon all the way to second in command over Egypt for the purpose of bringing Israel into the land and getting everyone fed. And so moving on to the next example here, Isaac. He married Rebecca at the age of 40. Now, it is a little interesting because back in those days, guys tend to live almost double the lifespan, right? Abraham and Isaac were well into their hundreds, 100 plus. I think Abraham was 175. And I forget if Isaac was less or greater than that, but it was around that area too. So, but still, getting married at 40 years old to a beautiful woman. And we know Rebecca was beautiful because Isaac made the same mistake as Abraham by telling Rebecca, hey, tell everybody that you're my sister, not my wife, because if they think you're my wife, they'll try and take you and kill me. And basically, it's just this whole story, and I'm definitely going to go further into that because it's a really cool story, the life of Isaac. But yeah, he ended up fathering Jacob and Esau at the age of 60. He ended up having twins at that age. So it's pretty crazy. It's pretty wild to be able to have, to get married and have kids at that. I mean, nowadays you'd think, wow, that's way too old. Oh my gosh. But clearly God's timing here was very perfect in terms of his purposes and what he wanted to accomplish in these men. Abraham was called at 75, right? The father of, modern Christianity, Islam, right? And Judaism, called at 75 to lead the nations. Okay, and he was called and to be the father of many nations. And he fathered Isaac, the chosen one, at 99, 100, roughly around that age. But imagine that. Imagine being the father of the chosen seed at 100 years old, right? When most people say, yep, you're past your prime. Moses was next up. So he actually led Israel for 40 years, starting at the age of 80. So Moses' life is really, really interesting. I'm going to have a further breakdown of this in a future video. But from 0 to 40, he was a prince in Egypt. He was living what many would consider a successful life here on this earth. And there's actually a verse that addresses this too, which talks about how Moses, could have enjoyed the pleasures of sin for a season, but instead chose to follow God, basically the gist of it. And he started at 80 years old, basically is when God called him to go ahead and lead Israel out of Egypt and to the promised land and through that. And so Moses really started at 80 years old. 80 to 120 was basically, you could call it his prime. That's when he was leading Israel out. And fun fact, I believe he got married right around 40 years old. There's a passage there in the Bible, I believe, that's 40 is when he left Egypt, when he killed that Egyptian who was oppressing the Israelites. And so that's when he killed the Egyptian, fled into the wilderness, and ended up marrying Zipporah, who would become his wife. So yeah, but again, all of that to say, Moses was doing this later. And then of course, Jesus Christ literally started his public ministry at 30 years old, right? We don't really see much of his life beforehand. We know, okay, he was a kid, and we saw that his family was taking him on the run, right? He's born, and his family's, constantly escaping King Herod and all this other stuff that's going on. And we see him at the age of 12, I believe, is when he was, when it was over in the Passover, and when that was happening, and Jesus' family loses him. And he says, hey, I'm not supposed to be about my father's business, my father's house. And boom. But his public ministry officially started at the age of 30, and he rose again at 33. So there you go. I think it's really interesting when you have God himself in human form coming into public ministry at 30 and then dying and rising again at 33. I don't know. I think that just says something about, okay, well, that's interesting. It's interesting that God chose that range of all the ranges he could have done. So there you go. And science confirms this as well. I'm not going to go super deep into this. I feel like this is very common knowledge now. It's very drawn out. But yeah, men typically are drawn towards a woman's beauty and appearance more often, and women tend to be drawn towards the man's character and energy. So that just seems to be, again, biologically how we're wired. It's not to say that a woman, when a woman hits a certain age, it's over. Not at all. When women, and same thing goes for men. Men can have, if a man is not necessarily the most physically attractive, there are things that they can work on there. Right. And that's the big key that you should take away from this is that, yeah, looks are something that you can absolutely work on. So it's not completely set in stone. And men can have children later on, like David did with Solomon at the age of 45. And so we think about that too, right? David ended up attracting Bathsheba. This is something people end up overlooking at the age of 45, right? Roughly around that age. And he had, Solomon a lot later in life. Okay, so that's just something to keep in mind. Again, I'm not, and for that, I'm not advocating adultery or murder or anything like that, just so I'm 100% clear. But it is interesting that David was able to attract a beautiful woman like Bathsheba even at that age, because, again, he's worked on his character, worked on his walk with God, and he's also, the king of Israel, so that definitely helps a lot. So, again, plugging Faith and Fortune Academy. So, guys, this is a program I made to help Christian men successfully navigate corporate America without losing their soul. The whole idea behind this is being as innocent as a dove, but as wise as a serpent. I feel like a lot of the advice out there is very much either too soft or too mainstream, like, oh, just work really hard and you'll get promoted. Or it goes on the exact opposite extreme of put in the bare minimum, backstab your coworkers, do all these things, put in the bare minimum effort. Doesn't seem to really hit on that Christian masculine excellence that I'm really looking to help guys with here. So I've got over 11 years of experience in corporate America. So again, if that's something you're really interested in, click on that link below. So I did find in addition to the stories, I did find key verses here, both from the book of Proverbs, that talk about, again, men and the wisdom that they have as they get older. And so, gray hair is a crown of glory. It is gained in a righteous life. That's Proverbs 16:31. And the glory of young men is in their strength. The splendor of old men is in their gray hair. So in other words, it's the idea that, yeah, as a man, once you get older and you kind of hit that certain level, you're going to be seen, right, as more wise, as more of that complete package, whereas when you're young, it's a bit more about just your raw strength, your raw youth, your physical attractiveness, all of that good stuff. But as you get older, again, you're going to accumulate wisdom and knowledge, and that's going to make you overall into a more attractive man. So, having said all of that, what shouldn't you do with this information? So we've just confirmed, okay, the Bible seems to support the fact that, yeah, guys do tend to peak later in life. Science also seems to support this. So what shouldn't you do with this information? Well, you shouldn't intentionally delay marriage or reject a high-quality woman just because you're younger, right? So whenever I go on YouTube, it seems to be this extreme, right? I'll see, especially on the conservative right, everyone's saying, no, get married young, get married super young, like early 20s, don't worry about money, just get married and everything will work itself out. And then you have the opposite extreme where you got, the manosphere, red pill, right? They're like, oh no, play the field for as long as possible, right? Get married at 40, 45, and then, do all this stuff. And the truth is that and I actually read a really great piece of advice from one of the books. I believe the author was Doug Wilson in one of his books, but he actually said his biggest recommendation for guys is when you meet a high quality woman, as soon as you meet a high quality woman, you marry her, right? So that could be as young as 18, 19, 20. That could be older, in your mid to late 30s, right? But when you meet that high quality woman, marry her. Right, and I thought that was excellent advice. I think that's really, really good advice, is to go ahead and marry that woman when you find her. You might find that black swan event that happens where it's like, you're younger, you're kind of building things, or, maybe you're not necessarily the most physically attractive looking guy, or your money's not up or anything, but for whatever reason, a really beautiful woman, she wants to come into your world and help build with you. Absolutely. Get married to her. That is a huge blessing from God. But you want to make sure she has high quality. When I say high quality, it's not just, she's attractive to you, but she's also got character. She's kind. She's the kind of woman that, other people speak highly of, right? Those are all the things that you want to look for if you are going to get settled down and get married young. So yeah, I don't want you to play the field for experience. And when I say experience, I'm purely talking here about, physical experience, right? I don't want to get too graphic or vulgar here on YouTube, but all I'll say is, if you go around and you think, okay, well, I need to sow my wild oats, you're going to have to deal with the weeds that pop up later as well. So yeah, you can get experience in terms of being friends with girls, right? In terms of, you can learn things like, hey, how do I become more attractive as a guy? How do I do this? That's fine. But again, I'm purely talking about playing the field for experience. That's not a good idea. Focusing too hard on money or looks, right? And you're neglecting your charisma and character. There are broke 20-year-olds who are going to be more attractive than millionaire 35 or 40-year-olds, right? Because they took the time to develop their character and their charisma and their energy and their presence that they bring around women, right? And a big mistake I'll see a lot of guys make is they'll focus on the money. I'll just grind and get my money up, and then once I get my money to a certain state, then I'll focus on dating, right? Or I'll just focus on my looks. I gotta, looks max to the, gotta get the hair and the jawline and everything. Looks and money are good to an extent, certainly, right? But again, it's that aura, it's that presence that you bring. That's the most important part. If you develop just the looks and the money and only that part, you're not going to be attractive to a godly Christian woman unless you also have that character that goes with it. Look, money and looks are not a bad thing. It is fantastic to have your money right. The Bible even says, it's got multiple verses on finances and the importance of a man providing for his woman and his family. And we'll dive deeper into that into a future video. But basically, yeah, don't neglect your character in sacrifice of doing that. Okay, you look at David. David married Michal, right? Saul's daughter, right? Literally in his teenage years, teenage 20s, as when I got married to her, because he showed bravery and confidence, right? And he focused on trusting in God rather than on his, material possessions or things like that. He got that stuff later, but again, you want to focus on that character. Don't neglect friendships or dating entirely in your 20s. Again, just because you will, if you're putting in the work, you will become more attractive. And that's the key. If you do the work and you work on yourself, you will become more attractive as you age. But don't forget, don't neglect the friendships. Don't neglect dating, Again, if you meet that really high quality girl, definitely take the opportunity and date her, right? And you'll figure things out and you'll grow that way. And don't neglect friendships either. You want to be surrounded by brothers, right? By guys who are going to help push you to become the best version of yourself and to follow Christ and to be on mission. Right? And you want to be part of community. There's so many guys who will sacrifice this, especially now in this hustle grind age, and just say, nope, I'm just going to grind. I'm just going to hustle. I'm a lone wolf. No, that's not how God designed us, right? God even said, like in the beginning, right, with Adam and Eve, he said, it's not good for man to be alone. So yeah, do not neglect friendships. That is a recipe for disaster, for regret. Do not expect to automatically attract girls effortlessly. Again, just because you have money and muscles. I kind of beat that bullet to death a little bit earlier there, but again, I'll emphasize, those things are great, okay? It is good, generally, to become more physically fit. It is good to get more money in your bank account, but parallel process, right? Develop that stuff and develop your character. And develop all of it at once so that you're not just stuck on the hamster wheel of, oh, I need to increase my salary. Oh, I need to increase the way I look, my clothes, my dress. I need to join this martial art. Too many guys will get stuck in that rabbit hole versus doing the work of actually learning how to attract girls and how to develop that character that makes them a more attractive person. And the funny thing is, don't be lazy. Don't say, if you're listening to this and you're younger, you're 20, 21, don't sit there and go, oh, well, I have time, so I can just wait. Yeah, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. I'll just keep playing video games, and then I'm just going to automatically, become more attractive later. That's fine. No, the idea of men being more attractive later is contingent, right? It's dependent on the fact of you putting in the work. So going to the gym, getting your money up, right? Becoming competent in very valuable skills that the marketplace wants. It's developing your character and charisma and confidence, and that confidence comes by successfully doing things in life, right? Completing projects, serving others. You're going to gain confidence in life through experience. And so that's only going to happen by actually getting out in the world, not by you sitting passively in your basement playing video games all day. Right. I think, again, that should go without saying, but a lot of people get up in arms when you say, oh, guys peak later, and they'll say, no, you could be, 35, 40 years old and a loser. And it's like, yeah, of course you can. That happens if you don't put in the work. But if you do put in the work, man, it can be a good time. Awesome, guys. So that concludes today's video. Thanks so much for watching. Again, plugging Faith and Fortune Academy below. It's a program I made to help Christian men successfully navigate corporate America without losing their soul. Again, over 11 years of experience condensed down into this course. I think you guys are really going to like it. So if that's something that interests you, click that link below, and I'll see you guys next time.